Welcome to this edition of CBN News Showcase. I'm Heather Sells. It has been called one of the church's dirty little secrets, and many people who suffer from it feel ashamed. It is depression, a serious mental illness affecting millions, including one famous Grammy-winning gospel musician. John Jessup talked with Richard Smallwood about the suffering he hid for decades.
Each week, these voices fill the halls of Howard University's historic chapel. The gospel choir sings across the country and around the world,
He washed my sins away,
representing soulful musicality and salt and light wherever they go. Today, members of the Howard Gospel Choir serve as ambassadors for the university. Hard to believe it was just several decades ago that gospel was banned by the music department, and any music major caught playing anything other than classical could be suspended.
Gospel music was a no-no.
Richard Smallwood, considered a living legend in gospel music, was one of the choir's founding members.
We knew how to switch from the latest gospel song to Bach in 3 seconds flat. If somebody said, "Here comes the dean," we go right from whatever we were playing to Bach or Chopin until he passed the door, and then we go right on back to our gospel.
His love of music started early.
My mother tells the story that before I could talk, when I would come home from church on Sunday mornings, I would hum whatever hymn they sang at church.
His mother helped young Richard develop an ear for all kinds of music, raising him on Ella Fitzgerald, Peggy Lee, and the Roberta Martin singers.
I was growing up this little kid with all these crazy tastes.
From a small kids choir to his current group, Vision, Smallwood's career includes a Grammy, multiple Dove and Stellar Awards, and a place in the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. He's also collaborated with the likes of Shaka Khan, Aretha Franklin, and Bill Gaither, with whom he wrote, "Jesus, You're the Center of My Joy." Whitney Houston showcased his song, "I Love the Lord," in the movie The Preacher's Wife. And last summer, his anthem, Total Praise, was performed at the White House for Pope Francis, broadcast around the world. Even with all this success and acclaim, Smallwood, an ordained minister, revealed last year that his signature sound came from a place of pain.
It got to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. I wouldn't get in the shower. The only time I would sort of go out was if we had somewhere to sing.
He says a series of tragedies, including the deaths of close friends and learning that his stepdad was not his biological father, landed him in what he describes as a dark well. That led him to a minister from his church who was also a licensed clinical psychologist.
After seeing her for a while, she said, "Richard, you're 100% clinically depressed."
The talks helped, but he remained in that dark hole.
I had to get on medication, which was a major decision for me because I was afraid. You know, I heard so many horror stories, but it wasn't getting any better.
The same man who encouraged concertgoers with lyrics like, "There's healing for your sorrow, healing for your soul," says he felt like a fraud.
They're coming up to me saying, "Your song saved me from this," or "Your song ministered to me in this." And I go off the stage and go back to the hotel and close the door, and I'm hurting.
Pain he kept hidden.
Because it's such a stigma, you're ashamed. I think certainly the church doesn't talk about it, and certainly my culture doesn't talk about it. So it was sort of a double kind of thing. I didn't want anybody to know.
Christian counselor Dr. Christine Buckingham says depression can affect anyone.
Certainly, having a relationship with Christ where we begin to understand our identity, who our identity is in Christ, can really deal with and correct some of the thinking errors that we have. But it doesn't make anyone immune, and we can look in Scripture and see many cases of depression.
She believes churches and pastors need to better address mental illness and applauds high-profile Christians like Sheila Walsh and Smallwood for openly sharing their battles.
When someone can stand up there and say, "This is what my struggle is, this is who I am," it can really demythologize what the process is. It can also encourage them because they can see that there's a good outcome.
All the glory, all the honor, from all nations and all people.
Smallwood's been off medication for the past 7 years and still sees his therapist from time to time. He credits his recovery to prayer and counseling. Smallwood's also just finished Anthology, a compilation project he calls the soundtrack of his life. But he's now turned to writing his autobiography, which Smallwood hopes will help many more potentially hiding their battle with depression.
I had no idea just sharing my story would encourage others. When they see someone who has been successful in some kind of way, talk about the stuff they had to get through to get to that point, that encourages them to say, well, if they can make it, I can.
John Jessup, CBN News, Washington.
Many people with depression feel ashamed, making them unable to reach out for help. Depression is more prevalent in Christian circles than you might think. So what can Christians do to help? Author and family therapist Linda Mintle shared more on the topic with CBN's Lori Johnson.
Linda, how prevalent is depression in general and also among Christians?
Well, it affects about 3 to 5% of the population, so that's a pretty significant number. You have a lifetime risk of developing depression is about 17%. So when you start thinking about 1 in 10 women and men are equally affected by this, women a little bit more, sometimes that's due to hormonal types of depression. It's a pretty significant part of the population.
What is depression? How do you recognize when you're depressed or when you're just
sad or down?
Or having an off day, off week, something bad happened to you, you lost your job or whatever?
Right. There's a normal bereavement that a lot of people feel in grief when they've had loss, and then there are these days that we all have when we're down and we're feeling blue and a little sad. But depression is really a persistent mood where you're feeling sad, and then you have irritability and you lose pleasure in the things around you. You may not be sleeping well. You have weight loss changes, either weight loss, weight gain. You don't want to eat. Your eating patterns change. So it's much more pervasive. You get irritable. You have concentration problems, and it persists beyond what would be sort of normal for maybe a death or something else that would create a sadness or a down mood. There's this thing in therapy we call behavioral activation, where if you act as if you're not depressed by doing something, by helping someone, the body and the mind kind of comes along. It's also interrelated, the body, the mind, and the spirit. We're very holistic in the way that God made us. And so if we're impacting the way we think, so that's what talk therapy does, is it's looking at how you think. It's a biblical prescription, actually, of renewing the mind, putting on the mind of Christ. And when we change our thoughts, it changes our emotions, it changes the way we behave and our perceptions, and it gives us hope.
Do you feel like there's more of a stigma within the church than outside of the church regarding depression?
I do see a difference. I think it's a stigma anyway, and there are a lot of celebrities who come out and say, I've been depressed, and then people in the church come out and say, I've struggled with this. We have this thing that somehow, if we're depressed, we're not trusting God, we're not, put on the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Yes, we have to do that. We have to train the mind, train the brain, but sometimes we need a little help applying those scriptures. And sometimes our doubt in God has to do with life circumstances and things that have happened to us that we need a little help working through so that we can actually disciple people in the Lord. So we need to not stigmatize people. We need to embrace it and say, we're going to come alongside you and we're going to work with you in these areas. Using scripture is definitely one of the things that people have to do. Continue to read, continue to, if nothing else, have the hope that Christ is working in you and he's going to help you renew that mind. And then just like you would with somebody who's diabetic, sometimes, we can be the best Christian in the world and we still need insulin. Mm-hmm. So sometimes there are people who do need that medication and it's helpful. So let's just be careful not to judge what's going on.
Absolutely. Linda Mintle, as always, great advice. I'm sure this will help some of our viewers, and it's great to see you. Thanks for being with us.
You can find more information about depression and how it's affecting the church by going to our website at cbnnews.com. Well, 20,000 Americans, that is just an estimate of how many innocent people sit in prison because they were wrongly convicted of crimes. As Charlene Aaron reports, those shocking numbers have led some evangelical Christians to change their minds about capital punishment.
Marvin Anderson enjoys working as a volunteer firefighter in Hanover County, Virginia, a dream job of his since age 10. It's a dream that almost never came true. On July 17, 1982, a report came in that a black man had raped and brutally beaten a white woman. Police immediately named Anderson a suspect.
They asked me, do you know anything about a rape that had taken place over the weekend? And my response was nothing other than what I heard people in the community talking about.
Anderson had no criminal record. Police obtained a photo ID from his job. They showed the victim that color photo, along with 6 other black and white mugshots. She pointed out Anderson from both the photo spread and a lineup.
The officers stepped into the room, and everybody else that was in the lineup was escorted out. When he came back in, I looked at him. I said, she identified me. He said, yes, and I started crying.
During the trial, the victim maintained Anderson sexually assaulted, beat her, and left her for dead. Meanwhile, people in the community told police that another man, John Otis Lincoln, was responsible, and a bicycle that had been used during the attack was identified by the owner, who said Lincoln had stolen it about 30 minutes before the attack. Yet Anderson was found guilty and sentenced to 210 years in prison.
The entire room went dark. I couldn't see anyone.
In 1988, 6 years after Anderson went to prison, Lincoln confessed to the crime, but the original judge in the case refused to vacate Anderson's sentence. Anderson reached out to anyone he thought could help prove his innocence. In 1994, the Innocence Project took his case. The nonprofit legal group works to clear people wrongfully convicted. Attorney Vanessa Potkin says the system mishandled Anderson's case on several levels.
We were very troubled by the lineup and the suggestive identification procedure that led to her eyewitness identification in the case. And then aside from that, there was this very troubling evidence pointing to another person as the actual perpetrator in the crime.
According to the Innocence Project, eyewitness misidentification, false confessions, and government misconduct are the leading causes of wrongful convictions. DNA evidence made the difference in Anderson's case.
They got a profile that they were able to run in the state convicted offender database. And lo and behold, it turned out that the DNA was consistent with Otis Lincoln, who by then was in the database.
Since 1989, DNA technology has helped to exonerate more than 300 people in 37 states, a reason why some in the faith community have reconsidered their position on the death penalty. Last year, the National Association of Evangelicals reversed its long-standing support of the death penalty.
The development of DNA evidence has provided new ways for us to probe the guilt or innocence of those who are convicted or who are accused of crimes.
Speaking to Congress last year, Pope Francis called on the U.S. to abolish the death penalty. The group Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty agreed, saying in a statement, the death penalty does not make society safer, and it can inflict additional harm on murder victims' families by prolonging the legal process. In light of these concerns and recent wrongful convictions and botched executions, more states should heed the Pope's call to end the death penalty. Potkin says DNA evidence helped free 18 innocent people facing execution. She questions their fate had that technology not been accessible in their cases.
Basically, 4% of people sentenced to death are actually innocent. So have all of those errors been corrected? I think, it would be erroneous for us to think so. The one thing that DNA testing has shown us is that, we have to have humility in this criminal justice system. We don't always get it right.
Marvin Anderson spent 15 years in prison and 4 years on parole. In 2002, he was fully exonerated and eventually received compensation from the state of Virginia. Today, he serves as chief of the Hanover Fire Department. He says spending most of his adult life in prison for a crime he didn't commit was painful, but that he's not bitter. He credits God for both the breakthrough in his case and the second chance at fulfilling his life's passion.
I talk to God and ask him to just take over my life, do what he wants to do with it. I've tried and I didn't succeed, so I'm putting my faith in you. And I think I'm doing pretty well today.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News, Hanover County, Virginia.
A small weight loss can lead to big health gains for obese people. Losing just 5% of their weight cut back the risk of heart disease and diabetes. It also improved the functioning of their liver and muscles. Those were among the findings from a small study at Washington University in St. Louis. And experts say that it's a sign that even dropping what might seem like a small amount of weight, 5%, can pay off and can set people on the road to losing more until they get to a healthy weight. Scientists believe 2/3 of all cancers are caused by our own bad choices, like smoking, not exercising, and the granddaddy of them all, a poor diet, because what you eat can literally kill you. Our CBN News health reporter, Lori Johnson, tells us about the dramatic link between cancer and sugar.
A clear relationship between sugar and cancer leads scientists to two conclusions. Sugar use contributes to cancer, and going without it can slow growth of the disease.
100 years ago, most folks consumed only 4 pounds of sugar a year. That's this much. Now, however, the average person takes in 40 times this amount, 160 pounds of sugar a year. That's this much.
Food manufacturers add enormous amounts of sugar, usually in the form of high fructose corn syrup, to products we consume all day, every day. Coffee drinks and cereal, soda and snacks, even foods you wouldn't expect, like spaghetti sauce and peanut butter. This tiny container of yogurt contains more sugar than a candy bar.
Now, scientists tell us sugar directly influences cancer cells. The amount we consume can either feed those cells or starve them.
In a landmark study, researchers at UT-MD Anderson Cancer Center fed mice high fructose corn syrup in percentages equal to what many humans consume. Those mice developed higher rates of lung and breast cancer compared to mice fed less sugar. The study also tells us something about people who already have cancer. One researcher said a lot of patients are told it doesn't matter what you eat after you are diagnosed with cancer. This preliminary animal research suggests that it does matter.
And it just absolutely amazes me that medical science is just now finding this out.
Fred Hatfield knows firsthand sugar intake matters after a cancer diagnosis. Back in 2012, his diagnosis was basically a death sentence.
The doctors gave me 3 months to live because of widespread metastatic cancer in my skeletal structure. 3 months. 3 different doctors told me that same thing.
It's a horrible, horrible feeling to have someone tell you that the person that you love only has 3 months to live and you're not going to be with him anymore.
Then Fred heard about a low-sugar diet called the ketogenic diet, believed to slow cancer in some people. With nothing to lose, he gave it a try, and to his astonishment, it worked.
And the cancer was gone completely.
Fred's recovery didn't surprise Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. His team at the University of South Florida discovered mice with highly aggressive metastatic cancer continued living when fed a ketogenic diet.
We have dramatically increased survival with metabolic therapy. So we think it's important to get this information out.
And it's not just lab animals. Dr. D'Agostino has seen similar results in humans.
I've been in correspondence with a number of people, probably at least a dozen people, and over the last 1.5 to 2 years, and all of them are still alive, so despite the odds. And so this is very encouraging.
The ketogenic diet means no sugar and no starchy carbohydrates like bread and pasta that convert to sugar. D'Agostino says cancer cells love sugar and starch because cancer thrives on the glucose from those foods. Remove the glucose and starve the cancer cells. Glucose also fuels our healthy cells, But if it's not there, those cells can switch to an alternate fuel source called ketone bodies. Cancer cells only run on glucose.
Your normal cells have the metabolic flexibility to adapt from using glucose to using ketone bodies. But cancer cells lack this metabolic flexibility, so we can exploit that.
Since processed food contains so much sugar and starch, people following the ketogenic diet tend to cook whole foods from scratch.
You can go online and there's just cookbooks and, it's clean eating, just very clean eating. None of the sugars, the salts, the trash food.
So when it comes to cancer, sugar is considered public enemy number one. Avoiding it could lead to prevention or slow it down in people fighting the disease. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
The Queen of England is giving the world a rare glimpse into her faith through a new book, The Servant Queen and the King She Serves. Now, in the foreword, the Queen writes, "I have been and remain very grateful to you, the people of England, and to God for his steadfast love." She also writes about the problems in the Middle East, saying the world is seen suffering on an unprecedented scale. The Bible Society in the UK is publishing the book in April for the Queen's 90th birthday. And that is all for this edition of the CBN News Showcase. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues that you care most about at cbnnews.com, and stay up to date with CBN News through Facebook and Twitter. We hope that you'll join us next time. Have a wonderful day.